Dave, thanks for being with us. Dave is a reporter for Semaphore and has covered this world of politics, like I was saying, if you could hear me, for quite a while, and done it better, I think, than just about anybody out there. So Dave, there's so much to talk about. We've been talking about the Abrego Garcia case. We've been talking about the courts. In your reporting, before we get into some of the stuff you've been covering lately, there's a lot of fear from the man on the street that the administration is not listening to the courts. What do you say to somebody through your reporting? How would you answer that question when someone says, "What happens now? Where are we going now?"
This is the theme of everything Trump is trying, and just to reduce it to the basics. Uh, the administration can act with unlimited resources paid for by taxpayers. If you are sued by them, even if you win and you're in the right, you will pay lots of money. If you are detained, even if you're unjustly detained and you were in the right, it's going to take a long time to get justice for that, and for anything that you lost in that process. So, the what people are grappling with is an administration that is willing to use not just executive powers, but the police powers, law enforcement powers to um, detain people incorrectly, wrongly, deport them to El Salvador and the CICOT prison incorrectly, and not respond to a court that tells them to stop. That's been the pattern. Not to overgeneralize. I'm just saying this is the worry I see when I was at a protest in San Antonio over the weekend, talking to Democrats at town halls last week, talking to Republicans too. But very little worry is coming from Republicans. A lot of the worry is coming from Democrats, and the Republicans, I think, have either, in my observation, either adjusted their view of executive power, or have always felt this way, that we need a strong uh, leader and willingness to break some heads in law enforcement if we're going to reverse liberalism.
In that vein, and talking and just respond to what you were just saying, there has been a little pleasure with John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, saying that, at a certain point, the president's going to have to essentially listen to what the court is saying. How contagious is that sentiment among Republicans? And should anybody look at what John Kennedy's saying, any Democrat really look at what John Kennedy's saying, or Republican, and either be happy or worry about what he's saying?
Yeah, I've seen two Republican responses specifically to the idea of moving a U.S. citizen to CICOT or to a foreign prison. And this is the thing. These are tactics from the war on terror. These are 24 at this point year old tactics that no president has given up, that Congress hasn't taken away. So that people are used to them in a different context, in the context of we are moving people who, don't worry, we consider them dangerous for terrorism reasons, and saying, well, MS-13 is a terror group. Any of these people who we're apprehending could be terrorists. Therefore, let's get them all out. And you've seen from Republicans either a worry that deporting U.S. citizens could go too far, or you've heard this from Jeff Van Drew of New Jersey, who I highlight a lot because he was elected as a conservative Democrat, and he switched parties because he was so angry about the Trump impeachment in 2019. He now supports everything Trump does and just says, yeah, just go along with what he's doing. There's more common for Republicans either to not react, because remember that the Congress is out right now. It is not returning until after next week, for after its Easter recess. The Republicans who have chosen to speak out mostly are saying, well, at least the president is trying to do something. And the easiest part to condemn is is the idea of a U.S. citizen being taken out, but not completely. You're not seeing unanimity with that, with opposition to that idea. You're definitely seeing some support for the idea of using every tool the federal government has to silence speech and criticism by Americans.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time, specifically. I mean, this small window of time we're living through, because we're seeing for the very first time in many of our lives anyway, that the whole idea of how what happens when you defy the courts, and what happens politically as well. What posture do some politicians take? You spoke with Connor Lamb. I was reading in
Mhm.
some before, when when you said, yeah, you could come on the show, I kind of skimmed that. I hadn't read it before.
Mhm.
Connor Lamb's a former member of Congress from a kind of purplish part of Pennsylvania, if I remember, because I remember covering him when he was in Congress. And he's talking about these the CCOP prisons as gulags, and what is the cumulative effect, do you think, about Democrats, whether it be Connor Lamb or Cory Booker doing a filibuster, or Gavin Newsom and Rob Bonta in California suing the administration? What is the cumulative effect when there can be no practical effect right now in politics?
Well, most of what Democrats are responding with are NGOs that sue the federal government for all sorts of reasons, but they're pretty unified on this through Democracy Forward, and those attorneys general, Democratic attorneys general. Most of them are elected. A couple are appointed by governors, and they also can use their state resources to act freely. And so the totality is that there's a lot of litigating the administration has to deal with in courts around the country, and it has a unified response, which is one, uh, saying that this is illegitimate and the judges who rule against them are illegitimate, and two, kind of counting on some House Republicans, although we'll see how far this goes. House Republicans uh, have almost unanimously be behind legislation to prevent federal judges from putting injunctions on what the Trump administration does, mirroring the lawsuit that is working its way to the Supreme Court. They want to limit the power of anyone who sues the government um, to stop what it's doing. Basically, that's the totality of it. There is this. If you look at everything the Trump administration is doing, if it was victorious in all of its arguments about what people can and can't sue over, or what people can and can't resist, then it would give a lot of power to any president, any future president. For example, Barack Obama was stymied a couple times by trying to implement something and having it halted with a nationwide injunction by a federal judge. Republicans want to make it so that no president ever has to worry about that again. I mean, you can do something, and if it's illegal, people have to wait until the Supreme Court decides whether it is or not. Not some federal judge saying this cannot be acted on until the case is over. Um, and that is so there's a goal here of giving the executive branch more room to move on things that would, I, by what I'm describing, would probably be struck down, be illegal, be unable to continue by the federal government. And the idea is, well, you can do a lot before you lose in court. That's the overall goal here. What can the administration do before it loses in court? And by the way, we in the president's party think courts stopping the president are basically acting wrongly in the first place. They shouldn't have that power.
Right. Well, that's the when you get to the thing that really disturbs a
Hmm.
lot of people, Americans, independents, Democrats, whomever, is that just sort of define the courts because you don't think that it should be that way, when in fact it's written to be that way until it's not. This unanimity among House Republicans,
Hmm.
predictively, sort of based on your experience covering the House and covering the sport, do you see? Do you see a break in that? And what would cause the break? Whether it's the timing, whether it's the lame duckness of Trump, who pretends he's never going to be a lame duck, or says he's not going to be. Where do you see a break in that dam?
You do see the beginnings of this with let's imagine that there are people who are apprehended for some other offense. Let's say it's uh, one of these people that the DOJ is throwing the book at who attack a Tesla dealership. You're not allowed to burn down a dealership. You're not allowed to blow somebody's car up. However, you are usually processed in American court if you do that in America. Let's say one of those people was sent to CCOT. Would that be a breaking point for Republicans? I think for some it would, not for all of them. The idea here, and there's been a lot of writing on this for years. The most influential thinkers of what the Trump administration's doing are very some of them neo monarchists, but very supportive of a powerful executive that can use its abilities to uh, punish foreign actors or Americans who they think are trying to undermine the country from within. If you go back to Trump's speeches and he talks about rooting out the communists and the Marxists, he wasn't saying rooting out the foreign communists and Marxists. He was saying The government should be working to make it impossible to organize against the success of the executive branch, in so many words. And so the keep reading the arguments for this. It's what is the point in America? Why should we have people trying to, let's say, undermine prayer in school, undermine um, investing in Israel, just all the sorts of priorities that conservatives have that are halted by secular progressives. Well, why do we let that happen in the first place? What kind of punishments are available for people who do that? Uh, why should your organization be allowed to, with tax exemptions, raise lots of money to oppose with the federal government? What if you're punished for doing that? And there's a lot of strength they're trying to hand over to the DOJ in order to make it harder to resist the government. And you premise of this conversation, I think, premise of your show is that this is unconstitutional, and that's what's going on. Is let's stretch the limits of the Constitution. I'm not doing a comparison with what the Obama administration did, um, but some of the arguments on the Republican, I shouldn't say Republican, but on the conservative side for this is, well, in their view, Obama did some things that they thought were unconstitutional and he got away with them. So let's try some stuff that everyone thinks is unconstitutional. Let's try the easiest one. I mean, the first one, I should say, not the easiest, was let's go and reinterpret the 14th Amendment and get the Supreme Court to interpret it in a way that would allow us to not give citizenship to most people born in America. That's the most basic one they've started with, but it's one of many ideas that have been accepted in our current political process, current political arrangement, and they say, why? Well, why is it? Why can't we just
Right.
find a court to strike that down, or ignore the court until the our opposition is exhausted? Maybe everyone at the law firm or everyone at the think tank is laid off by the time they have convinced a judge that we couldn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it always comes back. It's sort of the filibuster argument, right? That they don't want to get rid of the
Hmm.
filibuster. They want to be able to use it because they're afraid the other side doesn't. And so, you would think at a certain point they would try and create some kind of a ceasefire here that would make it more difficult because you Republicans, when there's a Democratic president, don't want to see this happen either. So it just seems, common sense would dictate that at some point some cooler heads. I don't know that there are cool heads anymore, but that they would perhaps sit down and try and work this out, or realize that it might not be the best tack to take because of the fact that it could come back and haunt them later on.
Hmm.
But before you go, I want to ask you, because a lot of viewers of the Mark Thompson show are concerned that Democrats aren't doing anything, and the practicality is that in the House, even though they're the best time is when the House is in recess for Democrats, because they're
Hmm.
sort of being paralyzed is not as apparent, but. And I say that obviously tongue in cheek, but the notion that there is a plan. Do you get the feeling that they are working on responding and a path forward that is different than the one that they've been on?
Who's the they? I heard the question, but who is the?
Democrats. I mean, Democratic leadership,
Oh yeah.
the Democratic Party, sort of writ large in Congress.
Oh yeah. Well, they're pretty transparent about this. They can't do anything with the House unless they convince three Republicans to vote with them and stop something. They can't do anything with the Senate unless they convince three or four Republicans to stop something. They are relying on courts to stop it. And one thing you've actually seen from Republicans, not to deflect from the question, as part of it is. Uh, or treating like a scandal the idea that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are talking to state attorneys general. That there is for example, Jeffries launched this litigation working group pretty early in the Trump presidency, and the goal of that was having some way to connect members of Congress to the state AGs and groups suing Trump. Republicans talk about that like it's a scandal. There is a Democratic conspiracy to stop Trump. This happened. This happens every presidency. There's usually different stakes than there are right now. Um, what is the goal there for Republicans? It's up to Trump, really. How many executive orders can he issue saying that, let's say, Crew, for example, is not allowed to sue him,
Yeah.
or that its employees are going to be punished for doing it? But the Democratic response is, and I've seen this really 48 hours ago. I was in Texas. with Greg Casar, the head of the Progressive Caucus in the House, and he explained what I just told you, and still got three very frustrated questions from the audience about why can't you do something else? What is there more you can do in the House? Why can't you stop this further? People have this is the minority always deals with this. During
Yeah.
the Tea Party era, the 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 only tool that Republicans had that was effective against the Affordable Care Act was the Senate 60 vote threshold on major legislation. Like they didn't have the ability to stop it in the House. They were just trying to convert Democrats to vote against it. This always happens. The party that lost the House election, the Senate elections, always unable to stop things. But you have seen a lot of anger from their base, and this effort by the leadership of the party to say, look, no one likes this. It's more fun to win an election. It feels more legit to win an election than to win a lawsuit. But we have to rely on lawsuits until we win the House and the Senate back. That's what they tell people. So it's actually how does it compare to what they've done in the past? One, this legal infrastructure is much more robust. They had it in the first Trump administration, but this is much more coordinated. Again, which Republicans treat like a scandal. Uh, and two, they're not as reactive to, let's say, activist demands. One thing I've been focused on just very narrowly in the last day is that you're seeing activists now show up and say ICE is out of control. Why can't Democrats do something to fund it or abolish it or whatever? And 8 years ago, Democrats said, well, that's an idea. Let's talk about it. And they'll now say, no, we've learned from the past that you need to be really strategic. You can't have a slogan that leads to a backlash. You can't say you can achieve something that can't actually be achieved. You don't want to introduce a bill that just goes nowhere. So let's be more careful. And so they're being careful. And the only downside thus far has been anger from Democrats that they're not doing more. That's manifested when you look at this polling, Gallup's polling, most recently, but I think NBC News too. The Democrats' approval rating, CNN, I should say, not NBC, is below 30%. Most of that change from 2 years ago is Democrats who like to vote for Democrats and probably will in the midterms, saying these guys suck, these guys are losers, they're not doing
Yeah.
anything.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
and how do they fix that? They, like win something, like even winning in Wisconsin, the Supreme Court race there, very high stakes, very expensive race. It proved that Democrats were not on the mat, that they could turn out people and better than Republicans. That didn't give them more than, I don't know, 48 hours of a respite from this.
No, it didn't. And also the other thing to be gleaned from that in Wisconsin and some of the other things is that MAGA is hard to motivate if Trump isn't running and if it's not a presidential, and it
And
creates an
even right
opportunity.
now, telling them like, "Hey, everybody, go out and vote and get and remove judges who hate Trump." Like that's what the
Yeah.
argument was in Wisconsin, and it wasn't that compelling to people. Not to interrupt you, but just yeah,
Yeah,
agreeing with
no,
you
no,
to interrupt
you're
you.
agreeing with me, which is even better.
Hmm.
So yeah, so that's good. And there is this sort of in sports, you want to fire the coach. If your team's losing, you fire the coach. Fire the coach. We got to make a change. We got to fire the coach. And I see it all
Hmm.
the time, being a sports fan, and it drives me crazy, right? Because you have to change the losing that the players are doing. Do you? But Democrats are starting to say we got to get rid of our leadership. We just got Jeffries, maybe not him
Hmm.
as much as Schumer, and there's this sort of outcry that we need the voices of Brian Schatz and Chris Murphy and Cory Booker and things like that to be leading this party. Is there any groundswell to that? I promised you that the last one was the
Hmm.
last question. I just when you were
That's fine.
talking,
I do the same thing.
I thought, yeah, I thought about that. Is there what do you think?
Uh, no, it's a good last question. Um, no, I think for Democrats to get their base excited, they just need to win some stuff, and they're not going to win more high profile stuff until November because they're New Jersey and Virginia races. They feel good about them, but convincing them that what they're doing is working, they get very short term victory. And not to get too big picture about the operation here, but every administration gets elected. They promise a lot of things. They can't do it all because they were usually trying to be strategic and not violate court order. We've had 100 days, we'll have more of administration that moves first, knowing that somebody's going to sue and try to stop them and says this is anti-democratic. You're seeing basically the rhetoric of democracy and being democratic and being responsive to people being used to justify acting for the president. And you've seen this rhetoric from Republicans consistently, you mentioned Kennedy, but the overall approach case by Republicans is that the American people voted for Donald Trump. Any judge or any sort of impediment to him is undermining the will of the American people. Very convenient now. Wasn't what they said in 2020, but it's what they say now.
Yes.
Uh, and how do you defy that? It's, well, in order to be sort of in equilibrium with Republicans, you just need to win the midterms and say, okay, we've had a presidential election, we've had a House election. There still is an idea here that's very old that the sovereign, the one person who most people voted for, is imbued with most of our power. Therefore, the system should bend to his will. It has never been that powerful inside one party. You did not see that when Barack Obama was president. You didn't see the you saw it with DACA is the closest analog I could think of, where people said, look, legally, you can do with presidential power, with delegation of what cases we do and take up in immigration law. You can do a lot as president that can't be stopped. But there was always a little bit of a nervousness about how some future president might use that power, and there really isn't now. So
Right.
rhetorically, you've got Republicans saying the will of the people says let Trump do what he wants, and you have Democrats saying the will of the Constitution blocks some of this. That's not the will of the people. They are saying outright that, look, this is majoritarianism, and demanding what you want is not the way to run the country. That's good. That's dangerous. That'll backfire at some point. But when the next time they have some Democratic mandate to stop that is not till November 2026.
Yeah, and we will keep watching that. Dave, look for him on Semaphore. Subscribe to his newsletter. I promise you will be smarter about all of this just from reading that once or twice a week. So, Dave Weigel, thanks for coming on to the Mark Thompson Show, and I will hope to see you out on the road soon.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.